Once upon a time, in the mystical land of Tibet nestled high in the Himalayas, a vibrant civilization began to take shape. The ancient Tibetan people, nomadic tribes, and pastoralists roamed the vast plateau, embracing a way of life in harmony with the rugged landscape. As the centuries rolled by, a great king named Songtsen Gampo emerged in the 7th century. With a vision of unity, he brought together various Tibetan tribes, forging the powerful Tibetan Empire. It was during his reign that Buddhism, a transformative philosophy from the plains of India, found its way to Tibet. Songtsen Gampo, eager to embrace this new faith, married a princess from Nepal and another from China who brought with them the wisdom of Buddhist traditions. Under the enlightened rule of Songtsen Gampo and his successors, Tibet experienced a golden age. The teachings of Buddhism spread far and wide, with monasteries and temples dotting the landscape. Scholars tirelessly translated Buddhist texts from Sanskrit into the Tibetan language, creating a rich tapestry of spiritual knowledge. However, as time passed, the Tibetan Empire began to crumble. The land fractured into smaller regions, each ruled by local lords known as Trisong Detsen and Dazai. Despite the political fragmentation, Buddhism continued to flourish, with the Sakya and Kagyu schools becoming influential forces in Tibetan spiritual life. The Sakya masters brought forth their profound teachings, while the Kagyu lineage upheld the legacy of the great yogi Milarepa. In the 14th century, a new school of Buddhism emerged known as the Gelugpa, or the Yellow Hats. Led by the great scholar, Saint Jitsongskapa, the Gelugpas emphasized rigorous monastic discipline and deep philosophical inquiry. It was during this time that the institution of the Dalai Lama came into being, with the great 5th Dalai Lama assuming spiritual and political leadership. Tibet entered a phase of relative isolation in the following centuries, shielded from external influences. This isolation provided fertile ground for the blossoming of Tibetan culture, art, and literature. The people nurtured their unique way of life, celebrating their traditions and preserving their ancient wisdom. However, the world beyond the Himalayas began to stir. In the early 20th century, British expeditions driven by imperial ambitions ventured into Tibet. Their presence, known as the Young Husband missions, disrupted the tranquility of the land. In 1904, the Anglo-Chinese Convention was signed, recognizing Tibet as an autonomous region within China. Yet the Chinese claim on Tibet was met with resistance and defiance. Amidst the shifting tides of geopolitical forces, the tale of Tibet unfolds. It is a story of a resilient people, bound by their deep spiritual devotion and unwavering love for their land. Through the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of history, Tibet's cultural heritage remains an indomitable force, etching its mark on the hearts and minds of all who encounter its enchanting story. In the face of external intrusions, Tibet stood as a bastion of unique traditions and unwavering faith. Its people, deeply connected to their land and spiritual practices, continued to resist outside influences that threatened their way of life. As the 20th century progressed, Tibet found itself caught in the crosshairs of political maneuverings. The Chinese government, undergoing significant transformations, began to assert its influence over Tibet, gradually encroaching upon its autonomy. Tibetan leaders, including the 13th Dalai Lama, sought to maintain their independence and safeguard the rights of their people. However, in 1950, the Chinese People's Liberation Army invaded Tibet, asserting its claim to the region. The Tibetan resistance was no match for the might of the Chinese forces, and the Tibetan government was forced to engage in negotiations. In 1951, the 17-point agreement was signed, under which Tibet became nominally recognized as an autonomous region under the People's Republic of China. Over the following years, tensions simmered as the Chinese government sought to tighten its grip on Tibet. Cultural and religious repression, along with political suppression, became increasingly prevalent. Tibetan monasteries were subjected to scrutiny and control, and the traditional way of life faced significant challenges. In 1959, a major uprising erupted in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, in response to the growing Chinese presence. The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, fearing for his life and the future of Tibet, fled into exile. He established a Tibetan government in exile in Dharamshala, India, where he continues to advocate for Tibetan autonomy and human rights to this day. Since the Tibetan diaspora, Tibetan refugees have spread across the globe, carrying with them the rich tapestry of Tibetan culture, religion, and identity. Tibetan communities in exile have worked tirelessly to preserve their heritage, establish educational institutions, and raise awareness about the Tibetan cause. The story of Tibet is one of resilience, endurance, and a steadfast commitment to preserving a unique cultural and spiritual legacy. Despite the challenges faced by the Tibetan people, their spirit remains unbroken, and their aspirations for freedom and self-determination continue to resonate in the hearts of people around the world. As we delve into the present day, it is important to remember and honor the vibrant history and profound contributions of the Tibetan people, independent of the narratives imposed upon them. Their story serves as a reminder of the power of culture, faith, and the indomitable human spirit in the face of adversity. In the present day, Tibet remains a region of great significance, both culturally and politically. The Tibetan diaspora, scattered across different parts of the world, continues to advocate for the restoration of Tibet's autonomy and the protection of Tibetan rights and traditions. Inside Tibet, the Chinese government's control remains strong, and the Tibetan people face ongoing challenges. The Chinese government has implemented policies aimed at assimilating Tibet into mainstream Chinese society, including the influx of Han Chinese settlers into Tibetan areas, strict surveillance, and restrictions on religious practices and cultural expressions. Despite these difficulties, Tibetans within Tibet continue to practice their religion and preserve their cultural heritage in their own ways. Tibetan Buddhism, with its profound teachings and spiritual practices, remains a source of inspiration and strength for many Tibetans. Monasteries and nunneries, despite government regulations, serve as important centers of learning, meditation, and cultural preservation. In the international arena, Tibet remains a topic of concern and debate. Human rights organizations, governments, and individuals worldwide continue to raise awareness about the situation in Tibet and call for respect for Tibetan rights, including the freedom of religion, expression, and self-determination. The Tibetan people, guided by the unwavering leadership of the Dalai Lama and other spiritual and political figures, strive for a peaceful resolution to the Tibetan issue. Dialogue and negotiations between the Chinese government and Tibetan representatives are seen as a possible path to finding a mutually acceptable solution that respects the distinct identity, culture, and rights of the Tibetan people. As the world progresses, it is crucial to remember the historical and cultural significance of Tibet and support efforts aimed at promoting a peaceful and just resolution to the Tibetan issue. The story of Tibet, its rich heritage, and the aspirations of its people continue to inspire and remind us of the importance of upholding human rights, preserving diverse cultures, and fostering understanding and compassion in an interconnected world. As the story of Tibet unfolds, it serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for cultural preservation, religious freedom, and human rights in today's world. The Tibetan people, both within Tibet and in the diaspora, remain steadfast in their pursuit of justice and autonomy. In recent years, there's been a growing international recognition and support for the Tibetan cause. People from all walks of life, including activists, artists, and scholars, have raised their voices in solidarity with Tibet. Through advocacy, public awareness campaigns, and diplomatic efforts, the Tibetan issue has gained global attention. The Dalai Lama, as a beacon of peace and compassion, continues to inspire millions worldwide. His message of nonviolence, dialogue, and mutual understanding resonates far beyond the borders of Tibet. He has been a tireless advocate for Tibetan rights, promoting the values of compassion, kindness, and respect for all beings. Cultural events, exhibitions, and festivals celebrating Tibetan art, music, and traditions take place in various parts of the world. These gatherings not only showcase the beauty and richness of Tibetan culture, but also foster cross-cultural exchanges and promote solidarity among diverse communities. Education plays a vital role in preserving Tibetan identity and empowering future generations. Tibetan schools in exile, along with educational initiatives within Tibet, strive to provide quality education while instilling a strong sense of Tibetan heritage and values. The preservation of the Tibetan language, literature, and traditional knowledge systems remains crucial in this endeavor. In the digital age, social media and online platforms have become powerful tools for raising awareness about Tibet. Tibetan activists and supporters utilize these platforms to share stories, images, and calls for action, amplifying the voices of the Tibetan people and reaching a global audience. Despite the challenges that persist, the spirit of Tibet remains unyielding. The Tibetan people continue to draw strength from their rich cultural heritage, their deep-rooted spirituality, and the unwavering support of the global community. The story of Tibet is an ongoing narrative, filled with struggles, resilience, and hope. It serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice, freedom, and the preservation of cultural identity are universal aspirations that transcend borders and ideologies. The collective efforts of individuals and nations are essential in upholding the rights and dignity of the Tibetan people, and in fostering a world where diversity, peace, and cultural expression are celebrated and protected. In conclusion, the story of Tibet is one that is marked by the indomitable spirit of its people and their unwavering determination to preserve their unique identity, culture, and heritage. Despite the challenges and hardships they have faced, Tibetans both within Tibet and in the diaspora continue to advocate for their rights and strive for freedom. While the path to freedom may be long and challenging, there is a growing global awareness and support for the Tibetan cause. The international community, human rights organizations, and individuals around the world are standing in solidarity with Tibet, calling for the recognition of Tibetan rights, religious freedom, and the restoration of Tibet's autonomy. The Tibetan people, guided by the wisdom of their spiritual leaders, particularly the Dalai Lama, approach this struggle with non-violence, compassion, and a commitment to dialogue. Their unwavering belief in peaceful resolutions and mutual understanding paves the way for a future where Tibet can regain its autonomy and flourish as a diverse and culturally rich region. History has shown us that the tide of freedom can shift, and oppressed peoples can rise above adversity. The story of Tibet is no different. With the collective efforts and support of individuals and nations, there is hope that Tibet will one day achieve the freedom it yearns for, where Tibetan culture and traditions can thrive, and where the rights and aspirations of the Tibetan people are fully realized. As the world continues to evolve, it is our collective responsibility to uphold the principles of justice, human rights, and cultural preservation. By standing together and working towards a more inclusive and compassionate world, we can contribute to the day when Tibet, a land of profound spiritual wisdom and rich cultural heritage, emerges as a free and vibrant nation once again. In conclusion, the story of Tibet is a tale of resilience, cultural richness, and an unwavering spirit. It is a story of a land nestled amidst the towering Himalayas, where a people with a deep connection to their land and spiritual traditions have faced numerous challenges throughout its story. From the early days of the Tibetan Empire to the present struggles for autonomy and cultural preservation, Tibet has stood as a symbol of hope and determination. The Tibetan people have withstood the tests of time, preserving their unique identity and traditions in the face of external pressures. As we reflect on the story of Tibet, it is essential to recognize the ongoing efforts of Tibetans within Tibet and in the diaspora, who tirelessly work towards the preservation of their culture and the pursuit of their rights. They inspire us with their unwavering belief in nonviolence, compassion, and the power of dialogue. While the path to freedom may be arduous, the global community continues to stand in solidarity with Tibet, advocating for the recognition of Tibetan rights and autonomy. The collective voice of individuals, organizations, and governments grows stronger every day, ensuring that the story of Tibet is heard and acknowledged worldwide. As we move forward, it is our duty to support the Tibetan cause, to amplify their voices, and to work towards a world where all cultures and peoples are respected and celebrated. Through dialogue, understanding, and a commitment to human rights, we can contribute to a future where Tibet reclaims its autonomy, and the Tibetan people can flourish in their land once again. The story of Tibet will continue to unfold, guided by the enduring spirit of its people and their unwavering belief in freedom and justice. It is a story that reminds us of the power of resilience, the strength of cultural heritage, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Together, let us be part of this narrative, ensuring that the story of Tibet reaches its rightful conclusion, a future where Tibet is free, its culture thrives, and its people live with dignity and self-determination.